Welcome to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where guests chat with me about Michael Crichton's 1990 novel Jurassic Park, and also Not That Too. My name's Ryan Rogers, and I'm a big dumb Jurassic Park fan. Welcome to episode 45, The Park, recorded here on a snowy Durham region day after we did indeed get quite a bit of snow as we wrap up the month of January on the 29th, 2023. Thanks for joining me today. A continued thank you to Christoph Oakes of Snail, S-N-A-L-E, and you can check out his incredible album on Spotify and Bandcamp, and today's intro is from the song T-Shirts, and our outro is Death of a Dream. I have some corrections. In episode 44, Control, in my interview with Adam Buck, I said that I recalled buying the novel The Lost World in the U.S. before it was released in Canada on a trip to New York City. But Adam was right. The teacher strike that opened the window for my family to take me on a trip without missing any school over the Halloween weekend was in 1997, and so I couldn't have bought the book as described on that trip. I literally went to my parents' house. We were visiting my dad's for his 70th milestone birthday. Happy belated birthday, Dad. And I dug through the attic of the barn for some old photo albums and found that the New York City trip was conclusively Halloween 1997. So now my story is this. I think we went to Washington, D.C. in 1995, and it would have been on that trip, probably, that I got the book in the States before it was available in Canada. Now, I was not able to find the photo albums from 1995, so I can't confirm these details, but only refine my hypothesis. But I was acutely aware that The Lost World was coming out before it was on bookshelves, because I remember reading, like, maybe it was Time magazine, I think that had an article about the upcoming sequel and the upcoming movie, and it had an entire excerpt of the novel in the magazine, a few paragraphs from, like, the Tyrannosaur parents attacking the trailer, which we can all recall from the novel and the film. That's one of the very few parts of the novel that was adapted into the screenplay, but I knew the book was coming out before it was available. That's true, and I distinctly recall getting it early, and I was delightfully surprised to do so, because it was something a common Canadian couldn't have as early as I had it. Again, that's just how I remember it. Why let the truth get in the way of a good story, right? What else did I get wrong? It turns out there were only 30 Major League Baseball teams. I thought there were more than that. I would never have guessed the NFL and NHL both have more teams than Major League Baseball. Also, let it be a matter of record, I'm a bad partner for Trivial Pursuit. I don't know anything. And finally, the Cearodactylus, a species of pterosaur that's coming up later in the novel, I have been misspelling and perhaps mispronouncing. It doesn't have two R's in it, and I've been pronouncing it like Sierra, as in like Sierra Leone, which has two R's in it, but the actual name is more Brazilian in its pronunciation and spelling. Now, what's the Portuguese pronunciation for the state upon which this animal is named? Well, I've heard it in Portuguese videos pronounced Ucera, Ciara, and Ciara, and Sayar da. So I don't know, but the Cearodactylus seems incorrect. You gotta put some Portuguese pep in it. That's how you pronounce it. The Cearodactylus. Cearodactylus. I'm not sure. I am not Portuguese. All right, dinosaur news. Our first story is of a new titanosaur with an unusual tail described in a paper from the journal Cretaceous Research in 2023. The specimen was collected from the Yixian Formation, which dates to the Bremian age of the early Cretaceous of the Liaoning province of northeastern China. The new species is named Ruxinia zhangi, and it is characterized by a unique combination of characters of the dorsal and caudal vertebrae and neural arches. The phylogenetic analysis machine calculated this sauropod as a Titanosauriform, and its description, quote, increases the diversity of early branching Titanosauriforms in China and highlights the tail morphological diversity in this clade. There are now more than 50 species of Titanosauriforms identified, but the caudal vertebral series are especially poorly representative elements of these animals, making this a special discovery. The name honors Mr. Ruxin Zhang, who made significant contributions to the establishment of the infrastructure and specimen collection of the Erlian Hayote Dinosaur Museum. The holotype ELDMELJ009, housed at the Erlian Hayote Dinosaur Museum, was uncovered from the Yixian Formation. It's comprised of 14 cervical, a series of dorsal and some sacral vertebrae, 52 caudals, 36 chevrons, several dorsal ribs, a left ilium, left pubis, left femur, left tibia, left astragalus, and a metacarpal and a phalanx. Ruxinia would have been about 40 feet long and had a stick-like tail. The fossils indicate it represents the largest sauropod yet found in the J-hole biota, with the length of the femur larger than those of Liaoningo titan sinensis and Dongbei titan dongai. The next story is about another very new paper published in January 2nd, 2023 from the journal Nature called Decoupling the Skull and Skeleton in a Cretaceous Bird with Unique Appendicular Morphologies. The authors report on a, quote, early Cretaceous non-avialan dinosaurian kinetic skull with an avialan postcranial skeleton revealing the key role of evolutionary mosaicism in early bird diversification. Named Cretaceous zhui, which combines the Latin avis for bird with kraten, referring to the North China kraten, and the specific name honors Chinese geologist Zhu Rixing, who has studied the destruction of the North China kraten. I looked this up. The North China kraten is a continental crustal block with one of the Earth's most complete and complex records of igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic processes, so it's geologically significant. Kraten avis has been phylogenetically classified as a Jinguiforticid, which I had to look up. These are bird-like animals that represent the transition from an animal like Archaeopteryx, which had a long tail, and more bird-like animals which have a pagostyle, which is like a short tail ending in a compound bone. So think of an animal with a tail and the other with a rump from which long tail feathers spring out of. One's got vertebrae in its tail and the other just has plumage there. What stands apart with this discovery is, as far as I can understand it, the postcranial body is very bird-like, but the skull is very non-avian dinosaur-like. There have been articles that have said this has a Tyrannosaurus head, which is a bit cringy, but it would have had a head much more like an Archaeopteryx, but a body much more like a bird, whereas Archaeopteryx has the long tail, long legs, and long clawed fingers. The holotype IVPPV31106, housed at the Institute for Vertebrate Paleontology and Paleoanthropology, was uncovered from the Jiufotang Formation. It's comprised of a complete articulated individual with preserved feathers. All right, and with the corrections in the dinosaur news out of the way, please let me introduce you to my special guest this episode. All right, my terrific guest today, I'd like to introduce everyone again to the author, the podcaster, and presently a Texan?
Correct, Texan.
All right. Please welcome back to the show my terrific guest from episode 14, Airport, Robbie Dorman. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks, Ryan, for having me back.
Well, thank you for coming back. I like this.
Yeah. I'm currently a Texan. I might be a Floridian soon-ish, depending on the whims of interest rates in the U.S. But, well,
that's
Texan
cool.
for now.
I keep hearing about Florida in the show. Have you lived in Florida before?
Yeah, I'm from Florida originally.
You're from Florida, okay.
We've moved a lot since my wife and I have been together. We've moved to South Florida, to Edmonton, to Austin, and now back to Orlando. So it's a lot of moving.
So that's exciting because obviously I'm calling you from Canada, although I'm not in Alberta. But no. When you're up in Edmonton, did you get into the hockey and stuff like that up there?
Oh yeah, I'm an Oilers fan now.
Right on.
In where I grew up, there's no hockey culture, zero. So it's a distant, probably fifth sport in where I am. Which football rules. Football is number one with a bullet. I grew up a football fan, but you move to Edmonton, I'm like, well, I'm like, do as the Romans do. Like, this is a way to kind of get into, be a Canadian, be an Albertan, be an Edmontonian. I was like, I started following the Oilers, and that is right in the midst of that big playoff run they had and obviously Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, those guys are incredible to watch. And now I'm just an Oilers fan, and they went to the Western Conference Finals last year, got destroyed by Colorado, but that's okay.
Yeah, they were in good company. I think most people did.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long playoff run. It's fun, but yeah, I'm a hockey fan now. It's my primary sports fandom.
How long were you in Edmonton?
2 years. We were in 2 years. We were right up against where we would have had to do more visa paperwork stuff to stay longer, and then we were like, and nothing against Canada, it's just so far away from our family.
Yeah. From
Florida, like whenever we'd want to visit, it's just so much travel, and it's very inconvenient because Edmonton, it's not Toronto. Like, you can, if you're in the Toronto area, you can fly almost anywhere within a direct flight probably, but Edmonton is always connecting flights, and after like harrowing journey, and it's just so cold. Like, I've never been so cold in my life, and now when we get winters in Texas, like, yeah, it gets below freezing sometimes, but it's not -40. Like, it's just impossible to describe to people. Like, oh yeah, I talked to people in Texas who've never left Texas or never left the South, and they're like, hey, I'm cold. I'm like,
Yeah, it's 35 degrees colder than my freezer outside right now.
yeah, it's not. Yeah, exactly. It's not. It's cold, but you're like, if you walk outside, could you die? Because that's the situation. You're like in Edmonton, like you get tips. You're like, don't, if you go out in winter and like literally people, my wife's coworkers would say, oh, if you pinch your nose shut and it doesn't open up, go back inside.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, because you could die. Or like when we leave the airport, we'd leave our car. We'd have to go, it'd be late at night and it's -25. And the bus driver who takes us to our car is like, I'm not going to leave until your car starts, because if I leave you out here, you could die. And we're like, thank you. I appreciate that. You're very kind. But yeah, it's the proximity to our families. And that's, ultimately like, hey, we're going back to Florida. So
you must have a book of all your neat horror story ideas. You'll have to jot down, it's so cold you will die, and just somehow have the cold chase people.
That's underneath that's in Antarctica, but a lot of that, there's a lot of cold in that. I love The Thing. It's directly inspired by The Thing, but the cold is a big part, and it's direct experience. There is no, I didn't need to read about how cold affects people. Like, I lived it. And it's a way of life for a lot. Like, you live up there. It's not like, yeah, it's cold, but it's just like, yeah, it's cold. But for me, I'm from Florida. It's tropical weather basically, and go to Edmonton, it's a rude awakening.
It's not part of your routine to be prepared for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like every day you're just like, oh yeah, you have to worry, make sure your furnace is working and have fires and stuff like that. Luckily we luckily had an apartment that was prepared for
right
for the winter. Yeah.
So was I know Killer Hockey Mascot came out last year, which was one of your newer novels, and is that influenced by your time in Edmonton, discovering the Oilers and enjoying that, or was that kind of always something that you're going to get to?
It's the main villain is gutsy.
Yeah.
It's very much like, what if we took Gritty? Gritty is fun. I love the Flyers are terrible, but Gritty is fun. And he was a meme. He's kind of fallen off a little bit now, but it was a huge meme impact then. Right, like that same period I was starting to get into hockey, and I was just, I don't know. I think I was joking with a friend one day about, it would be fun to have Gritty, but dial it up even more and make him a killer. And he was like, "You should write a book about that." I'm like, "I should." It was like, yeah, it's connected to hockey, but it's really not. It's not a hockey book. There's some like fun supporting characters that are hockey players, but it's mostly about, I don't know. It is like, I think about this a lot, where like I have some books that are like huge gut punches and filled with things that like rip you apart and traumatize you, and then other ones that are like more like throwbacks to like those fun slashers from the 80s or 90s, where it's not necessarily like, you pull your heartstrings a little bit, but mostly it's just like, this is fun. Like, it's a big, like, imagine Gritty, but he's a killer, and like, it's just silly and stupid, but you just play it straight. I went, you know what? And just title it Killer Hockey Mascot.
Yeah.
Like, it's just that, why am I going to dress this up? Like, it is what it is. Like, when I talk to people about it at shows, like when I bend at horror shows or something, I'm always like, it is exactly what it is. It is exactly what it says it is. The book is called Killer Hockey Mascot.
Yeah. Snakes on a plane.
Yeah, precisely. It is literally that. It's like, and Snakes on a Plane is like, it tells you what it is. You know what it is going in.
Have you seen the trailer for Cocaine Bear yet?
Yes. I'm so excited.
You know exactly what you're getting.
Yes, exactly. Like, that movie is like, here it is. This is what it is. What it says on the tin. It's going to be full of insane, dumb, like, I don't know, like gore and violence and a cocaine bear. Like, it's like, that's just the title. Like, what else do I need? Like, I'm expecting like deep emotional connections to any of these characters? Nope. But that's fine. I don't want that. That's not what I'm watching this for.
Yeah, there won't be some like subplot about locusts suddenly.
Oh no. All that.
Well, that's cool. Was there anything else that came out of your time living up north in Canada that might
have a
make its
parka.
way make your way into your stories, into your novels?
Oh, I mean, I think it is like that. Also, when you describe the Twilight Zone, the stranger in a strange land kind of feeling, that is in all of my. That's in a lot of my books. Is like that idea of someone walking into a strange situation, not feeling like belong. I could probably point to half my books where the protagonist has entered into a new town. They're a new person, a stranger in a strange land, and that it it kind of affects their worldview, and they feel like they're being watched. It feels like they don't belong here. And that feeling never goes away. It's always there.
So yeah, last time we spoke, you had Burial coming out, or it was new at the time, and and you recommended ReGrowth as a very Michael Crichton-esque styled story, and I'm happy to say I got to check them both out, and they were both cool. I don't know if this is like common through all of the novels you work on, but these two, they both are kind of set in these dystopian futures. And for me, I really identified in Burial that it felt very much like I was a big fan of Fallout, specifically like Fallout 2, and then the New Vegas one was really cool. And it just kind of, as it was like that Western feel going through the wastelands and things like that, I thought it really had that feel to it. And so I connected in a really fun way. Like, I think it was interesting too that like you don't get into too many details regarding like how this new reality is presented itself. You're living in it now, and there isn't like a huge backstory, although I'm sure you write something in your head to make it work. But the world building was good, but it was sparse, and so there's a lot of imagination. So I was able to fill it in with like my interpretation of what the wastelands would be like. But it was super cool and fun adventures. Yeah, it was just like playing Fallout. It was a lot of fun, I thought.
I mean, Fallout is. I love Fallout.
Yeah.
I love all the Fallout games. There's definitely an influence there. Mechanical for Leibowitz, all the classic science fiction. There's a little bit of that, where it's people starting to. And it's also like I was thinking of another direct influence on that is like the old, like some of the Peck and Paul westerns from like the ones especially like Wild Bunch in particular, where Wild Bunch is. It's a Western, but it's right at the end of the Old West, there's a car in the Wild Bunch. People see a car, and you get the sense that this old way, this wildness is kind of going away a little bit. The wildness is being taken, and that's not bad, but it is an end of a way of life. It is a change, and it's interesting to see how people respond to that. I don't necessarily I don't necessarily want to put in a bunch of lore about how did the world end, who's responsible, all that stuff. I think it changes the book fundamentally. It would make it more of a proper. I'm not Neil Stephenson. I'm not going to write a 1,000-page science fiction novel that has all that stuff in it. And I love Neil Stephenson. I think he's great, but that's not me. And I think, yeah, you can fill in the gaps. There's so much post-apocalyptic fiction now. There's always these like little pockets of like what happened. And I think I just give like enough hints to like, oh yeah, there's bombs. A lot of things got destroyed. Obviously, there's radiation plays a big factor in the story. But other than that, like Emma doesn't think about that stuff, so you don't either. If the character was an archivist or a librarian that worked in the city, who is like trying to piece this stuff together, then that I would write more of it. But I think Anna doesn't care. Emma. I get all my characters mixed up.
Sure, yeah.
Emma, and I just reread Burial, and I've already forgotten. Emma doesn't care about that stuff. And also, like I think of a lot of times. I think of if you've ever played any of the Dark Souls games or Elden Ring, the From Software kind of games. There's no story in it, really. You're just kind of wandering this world, and you infer things just from picking up pieces of things and stuff like that. And I think like that's where my mind was in that place too, where it's just like follow Emma around and she'll tell you what you need to know.
Well, I like it in that it's story building requires cohesion, or else you wind up with just like different narratives, and if they don't connect together, they can be distracting or just a waste of time or something like that. And so you're right, unless you had an archivist or there was something in the past or they had some stake in the in the creation of this dystopia. There was something related, you put it in. If it's not related, you can have a very streamlined and potent story without diluting it with details like that, and it works successfully. Like you wonder, and I think wonder is good too, but you don't miss out by any means. I thought it was really well done.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And then that seems like in a more distant future than ReGrowth, where it still sounds like the cities are falling, sort of.
Yeah, ReGrowth is absolutely a pandemic story. Like it was very much like, and it was just like push it a little. Like there's, I think I mentioned at the very beginning, like, people are fighting over toilet paper. And it was like I remember very distinctly early days of the pandemic when there was grocery shortages and stuff like that, and it was very much like that tense kind of space where people are uneasy, they don't know what's going to happen. I just bolted that onto the idea I already had of the scientists and trying to regrow limbs and things like that. But that is near future, and to be fair, those two books are probably the only ones that are so far out of modern day.
Oh, is
where
it?
I think most of my books otherwise, people ask me, are they connected? My books all connected because I write so many of them, and I like to think most of them take place alongside each other. Like they're not, and I do put Easter eggs in, like Death Rattle in particular. It has a few Easter eggs that mention things happening in my other books, but those are the two where they can't take place in the world as the normal world, so to speak. So they don't, but.
But a similar adjacent world, yes.
yeah, exactly. But it's more about, I created the world that would best, basically, create a pressure cook. Especially in ReGrowth, it's a pressure cooker situation where put it in this lab and sort of really increase the pressure, dial it up over time, and what would create more pressure than the world ending.
And then I think you described ReGrowth as living in a dystopian future, having a Bond villain for your nemesis or as your employer, and everybody's underground, and then a scientist is pressured to develop an advancement that helps people regrow their limbs, but his faith in doing the work for good is shattered pretty early, but he's compelled, he's forced, cajoled to move forward with it without ruining anything. And it was really, you mentioned this one's the most, I guess, Crichton-esque, and it was. I liked how they become isolated, they get into this scientific world. And those are two things that I think Crichton does really well. Jurassic Park in particular, it has to be on this little island. It has to be in this little spot. If it were anywhere else, it doesn't. It's proven to be a little sloppy when they take dinosaurs off the island. But yeah, and the science was really neat. How much work went into coming up with whatever the barriers are to regrowing a limb, or the whole idea of feeding calories into it was really fascinating. Is there research you looked into that, or did you just have to imagine it?
I did. I think there are levels to this, and I think Crichton generally did look closer into things. I think his science is more sound than mine, obviously mine, but because cloning is generally was and is still, we can clone animals. It's generally, it's under a lot of scientific rigor, but you can do it, and they have done it. I looked up people, and there are scientists who are researching, obviously, healing techniques to get more advanced healing, better and faster. There are people who research, can we regrow limbs? Is it possible in mammals and humans, etc.? And the obstacles that they face in the book are real obstacles. They're real things that people face, and gene editing and Cas9 I finished my read of Jurassic Park before recording, and there's mentions of all that stuff in it, and it's interesting to see, because I did look at what's the current research, and what it's at, and what are the pitfalls, and I just kind of well, this is the near future, this is advanced tech, I could fast forward through some of these things, they figure out the problems, and Matt, my co-host in the Simpsons Show, is one of my beta readers. He looks at the books before anyone else does, one of them, and he's pretty dialed in on modern science stuff, and he was my, I lean on different beta readers for different books depending on their tastes, and Matt, I definitely lean, I'm he reads a lot of science fiction, hard science fiction too, so I'm does this pass muster? Does this pass it just needs to pass the smell test, really. I don't need, like, if you're an actual scientist and you're working on gene editing and all this stuff, you're probably going to read my book and laugh at me. That's fine. Yeah. I don't, yeah, I get it, but it's mostly, I get like 80% of the way there with real science, and then I let the rest of the 20% take over, where it's science fiction, where I'm like, and like the monk, like I mentioned, like, oh yeah, they use monkfish, stuff. They blend in all these different gene techniques and inject it this way and that way using CRISPR and all that stuff. That if it ever does work, that I think that is how they would end up doing it, and that's the only kind of rigor I held myself to. But this is definitely a Crichton. It's definitely a Crichton, but also there's some really goopy body horror stuff at the end that I also wanted to write specifically. Like, I was like, I want to, I don't know if you've ever seen the anime Akira.
I've heard of it, and I think I've seen it on your bookshelf or something like that in the photo.
Yeah, I have the manga I'm pointing at it right there. Yeah. The manga is also great, but it's very, very long, so it's much more digestible. The anime is also great and beautiful. It is like often held as like one of the defining films that kind of brought anime to the West, to more mainstream acceptance in the West, because it's so beautiful. The animation is incredible. It's a science fiction story as well, but it's also like there's some kind of gross body horror stuff in it. So Akira is definitely a big influence on ReGrowth. I always pitch it as it's Crichton meets Cronenberg, because David Cronenberg is so well known for his body horror, but it's actually more Michael Crichton meets Akira Toriyama. But that is not as most people, when I ask, have you seen Akira? They're, maybe 1 in 10 will have, or 2 in 10 people have seen it, but most haven't. So I just, Cronenberg is good shorthand for kind of gross body horror stuff. But I don't know. I think it's also like I think The Fly or The Fly 2. The Fly 2 is not a very good movie, but it does have a similar setting. So I think those kind of body horror movies where it's like a man is changing into something and he doesn't know what to do about it. So there's elements of there.
One of the things that you do that Crichton doesn't necessarily do in Jurassic Park anyhow, but in some, is so Jurassic Park has a fairly large cast of characters, and you don't really spend a specific amount of time with any one of them, and they don't really go through like a growth or a journey, really. I mean, they survive adventures, but you don't really see them coming of age or something like that. But obviously, in the two that I had gone through, really, really character-centric, and their motivations are always clear, and as they learn and change, you feel that with them, and they have responsibilities to others and stuff like that, which Jurassic Park doesn't do. And maybe, I don't know if Crichton did well or often, but that I don't think was what Crichton was focusing on. But it's good to see that is what you do. And then as they go through these journeys, you do have like the heartstrings. They aren't just these splatterfests or crazy things, and interesting journeys that they go on, which was good. And a big part of the Simpsons Show is when you fix a broken episode, and that's got to be the hard part. That how could you change this collection of nonsense and turn it into a narrative that means something at the end? Because the first few seasons of The Simpsons did that, and even Full House did it. There was like a little sit down with Danny Tanner at the end of the episode and have a little heart to heart, and it was contrived and it was dumb, but it was there because it meant something. And then without that, though, like this. What does the show even mean if you don't have that? If it doesn't mean something, what is it?
I mean, I think Crichton doesn't. He's in like rereading Jurassic Park, and we drove from Texas to Florida for the holidays, and I don't know if I'm making it a tradition, but I re-listen. I have Sphere on audiobook, so I re-listen to Sphere, and then I reread Jurassic. I finished my read of Jurassic Park, and I think Sphere has a little bit more of it, but I think honestly, Crichton, through most of his books, he's really capturing like the pulp stories, pulp science fiction from 30s, 40s, 50s, and kind of melding that with a somewhat harder sci-fi with the actual data about how are we cloning dinosaurs? How does DNA work and all that stuff? And those pulp stories, they're adventures, they're like Sphere in particular calls into 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne, and I think Crichton is a Jules Verne type in a lot of ways. And I loved Jules Verne when I was a kid, and I love Michael Crichton, and I think it's for those same reasons. It's like it is a exciting adventure that is also, it makes it feel more real because he leans so hard into harder sci-fi. He is also not a Neil Stephenson, but that is also not a bad thing because Neil Stephenson books are very long and can sometimes be hard to get through because you have to read them over weeks. Well, in Jurassic Park, I finished this in a day. Like I breezed through it because one, I've read it many times, so it's not like I'm not processing a lot of new information. But the Simpsons in season 20, in season, especially the late teens, which is absolutely brutal. It's just things, things happening, and there are absolutely episodes where Matt and I are like, I don't feel like it. It's too hard. Like I feel like almost like being mistreated, like by the writers of the show, like of the show that I've loved and now have put a lot of hours into it because I've literally, I think I've joked about this with Matt before, but I think it's true. Me and Matt are probably the people, aside from people who have worked on the show, have actually spent the most time on The Simpsons, working with The Simpsons properties. And maybe if you're like working a ride at Universal, if you have like take a taker at one of the Simpsons rides, but it's the Fix This Episode stuff is, I think it is one of the things that it is a unique thing that I can bring. Like anyone can record a podcast talking about The Simpsons, and there are many people who do, but I think it is something that because I write for a living that I can add that little, and I think it is a thing that I try and put in most of my stories. Some of my stories, like Killer Hockey Mascot, there's somewhat character stuff in it, but it's not a character journey like Burial is. Burial is you're following Emma along the whole way, and it's her journey. But most of my books, I connect to a character, and because you care about the character, you care about what's happening to them, you care about what's in the story. And that's always was The Simpsons to me, is I care about this family. I think it helps that I connect in that, like, Homer is my dad and Marge is my mom. I'm not Bart, I'm more of a Lisa, but it is that idea, like, you can kind of, I insert my family into those roles. It became a part of my life, but there's a reason I'm 37 years old. I can go back and watch those 90s episodes, the golden years, and you watch Lisa on Ice where Bart sells his soul, and they work as art. They're great character arcs with incredible comedy, and it's not that I don't believe the Simpsons writers at any time are bad writers. It's just feel like I can't understand putting that stuff out the door, and like, because you would read it and you would know. Like, I don't consider myself a writing genius. I consider myself a competent writer. And you could easily look at a script and go, no, we're missing things. Like, I can see when I read my rough drafts, I go, no, you need to do this, Robbie. You need to add this and this and this. You need to do these three things where the story doesn't quite work, or it's not quite as good. And when I look at when I watch these episodes, it's crazy to me. It's just mind-boggling that this got passed first. Like, people wrote the script, and then it went through table reads and animation, and that's millions of dollars spent on every episode. And no one said, you know what, guys, we should rework this. We should recut this. And it feels like they had like just a mandate at some point, like pump them out.
It's like the whole framework of how they do it was perhaps erected incorrectly because it's overlooking that in the entire process. Yes.
I mean, it's like people always ask like, there's a lot of questions like, well, why did the Simpsons get bad? Why did Zombie Simpsons happen and all that stuff? And it's not one reason. It's a big combination of things. I think in a perfect world, I think they would. Like, I think all those people probably do have pride generally in their work and want to make a good show, but there's probably there's a lot of factors that contribute to it. And I think when you do, I don't know, I'm in a very specific situation. Most, like, I've talked about this too. Most people who watch the Simpsons in the very bad years, they will watch a bad episode. Most of them, those are the really bad ones everyone would hate. But if you watch one of the mediocre bad ones, which there are so many, most of the bad episodes are just kind of mediocre. Like they're missing things. They don't make sense. They're mostly unfunny. Most people will go, oh, that's fine. But if you don't watch it every week, like Matt and I have, and the people who follow along with us, you don't put it all together. Probably you watch an episode here or there. You watch what something is on a rerun or something that you've DVR'd, and you're just like, I'll put that one on, whatever. And it's on for 20 minutes. Maybe you're doing laundry while it's on. Maybe you're exercising or doing chores, or you just sit on the couch and you're on your phone while a show's on. You don't think about things like I do or Matt does, because we're talking about it every single week, and you just notice the same things over and over and over again, where like, the couple episodes, the last few episodes, they just don't have endings, where they don't have proper endings, where there's no, like, the episode that just came out, it has all the makings of what could be a good episode of The Simpsons, but they just don't do the big dramatic story beats at the end. And it's kind of like, why don't you? They would have to rewrite other things. They're probably like, well, we also have 20 other episodes we need to worry about in this season. And there's Fox Studio, probably the Fox Studios people on top are probably always like, blah, blah, get them out. And like, there's pressures in a lot of places, but I don't see any of that. I just see the show, and it's not very good a lot of the times. And you've told me, like, I think the fix this episode stuff is the best part of the show a lot of the times. And people complain like you're so negative. I'm like, well, like, have you watched this? I've watched 10 years of it. It's 10 years of bad Simpsons at this point. And that's more than the good at this. There's more bad than good at where I'm at in the show, where we're at in the show. And I try and remain positive. Like, I feel like season 21 has picked up a little bit. Like, the episodes are somewhat better, some of them. And that's enough. Like, I think I even said that this week, where I'm like, I'm just hoping the next one is better than the last one. If it's even incrementally better, then that's a good sign. It doesn't have to. And like and I will say, there's no like Marge sexually assaulting her husband. There's no Homer framing Marges for DUIs. There's no like weird Chinese racism episodes, like where we just go to China and be racist, like,
or the entire continent of Africa.
Oh God Almighty, that episode! Oh God, it was so bad.
Watching it you were visibly concerned watching it. The first time it came out, I remember like, wow, what are they doing?
No, I know, it's you watch it now, and it's not like that episode came, like, if it came out in 1990. I would go, that's 30 years ago, and I think there's a certain time period where you're like, it's culturally acceptable and stuff like that. Like, even though it's not right, it's still gross. But when it's in 2005, you're like, I was in high school in 2000. I was in college in 2005. Like, I knew then that this wasn't okay. Like, are all the people on the show just going like, oh yeah, it's fine. Africa is just it's one land mass, and it's all the same. And you're like, there's many.
It was like Ernest Goes to Somewhere.
Ernest Goes to Africa. VHS. Also really racist. But and like, it's like, I think of like Ace Ventura 2. Like, that's a huge comedy when it was really, if you made that today, oh my Lord, people would rightfully so go, what the hell are you doing? What? And I think that's like, there's blinders on for a lot of people because they get trapped in a particular time period in their cultural mindset. Like, this is a social mindset where this is okay. But nowadays you're like, it's not bad. It's good. We're more aware of these things.
Well, going back to the good seasons and the good years.
Please keep me on track.
They're the bad ones and the good ones. We were thinking, boy, it would be interesting to have some fun thinking back on our favorite Jurassic Park references that were in the show. They mostly would be from when the film came out in the 94-ish, I think is when they would have been able to see it in 93, reference it in 94, which is still a pretty quick turnaround in terms of how long it takes to make an episode. But the first one that comes to mind is Stampy, when Bart opens the curtain and he gets an elephant, and Stampy's eyeball is there. So that episode came out in '94, which means they had to have that. Basically, we got to put this in the episode right away. Jurassic Park obviously was on everybody's mind at the time, but that's a pretty quick turnaround to get a reference into a cartoon.
Yeah, I wonder, like, I have to think about the references the Simpsons make and, like, the turnaround. Like, that's the thing where they've shown their age because South Park has such quick turnaround time on their animation. They can make those cultural references from things that happened a week ago or 2 weeks ago. But the Simpsons have 6 to 9 months at least. And, you know, maybe that, like, I'm wondering, like, was that the eye, the T-Rex eye, was that in an early Jurassic Park trailer, maybe? And they saw that. That, like, I try and think of things like that. Like, did they, to get a heads up, did they, like, or was that a late insert? Because they can, like, if it's, I know if you listen to the director's commentary on the Simpsons stuff, they talk about throwing in, like, a small little bit, because they can get in, they can turn it, like, if it's a 2-second or 5-second clip, they can get that animation done relatively quickly if as an emergency, like, hey, get this done, get this through. And I'm thinking, like, either it's those things, like, well, if that happened real fast after the thing came out, like Jurassic Park, it's either, I'm thinking, like, did they see an early trailer, or did they go, no, we have an elephant episode, Jurassic Park's hot, and then, like, Jurassic Park's great, and everyone saw it, and I was obsessed with it. I was a kid, but I was obsessed with it. Everyone was obsessed with it. Maybe they were like, oh, well, why can't we do this? You know, you have that fun little idea, throw it in there, have the callback to the T-Rex, and maybe that's it. I don't know.
So, off the top of my head, I could think of about 3 pretty solid Jurassic Park references that get into the show. Which ones jump to your mind right away?
Billy and the Clonosaurus the first thing I think of. Immediately I go,
yeah,
the
and it's the best. It's the best.
The very bare, but, like, it's, I don't know. And I've heard also as an author who goes to and sells books at shows, a lot of the time you get lots of people who come up to you and tell you their book idea or their story idea, and you have to sit there patiently and listen and be patient, even though you are most universally, you're like, this is you're just describing a dozen other stories that already exist. You can't you're not gonna, and people are like, I wanted to be a writer. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Just go sit down and write, man. It's not romantic, but Apu's reaction,
yes,
it is what I want to do. It is what I want to do when I hear that. I want to yell. I'm like, that exist, man. You can't.
Yeah.
How can you be so oblivious?
A 10-minute tirade in a time lapse, and then actually what I meant to say was thank you. Coming in.
Thank you. Come again. Exactly.
That's too funny. I had to cheat to find more Jurassic Park references.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. I used to be, like, the obsessive Simpsons fan. I have to remember all this stuff. But now that I've seen so many episodes and I do the podcast, and you can hear it when we do trivia, like, I don't remember anything anymore.
It's all
and so, like, and when people are like, I had to look up references, I'm like, that's normal human behavior. Like, it's not normal to remember everything. And if you can, I applaud you. That's Matt. Matt has, like, you know, his brain is like a freaking encyclopedia, especially when it comes to Simpsons. I get so frustrated that he remembers all this stuff. But it's normal to have to look. I don't know. Also, I think maybe I'm just getting old and my brain's deteriorating. But.
Well, they're not important things to have to recall, but there was...
No, exactly. It's small things here and there.
There was a more recent Treehouse of Horrors, I think, that was one of the segments was, like, the senior citizens in Springfield all became dinosaurs or something like that. And
that is not a very good... That Treehouse of Horror in general was not good, and that segment was not... I could rewatch it. Maybe my mind would be different, but I'm pretty sure it was not very good. But...
I just liked how maybe the character design in terms of how do you make the characters into dinosaurs. I think that was okay. I don't imagine the rest of it was any good.
No, I mean, that's, like, at this point, Trails of Horrors will always give you that, and I can appreciate that. Like, character designs, fun, new, different character designs. And The Simpsons have always been great at that. Even in the worst shows, the worst episodes, you're always going to, like, when it's a winter episode, everyone's in their snow gear. It feels real. It feels nice. And the fun designs in science fiction, horror, Jurassic horror stuff is always fun. Like, it feels like it's another thing where, like, it took this long for you to do like a Jurassic Park thing where, like, and with Jurassic World and the new movies, like, you have a layup to do anything with it, but instead you just do this weird old people as dinosaurs thing, and I'm like, can I just get a direct parody of Jurassic Park? Like, can I just have the family and the townspeople as the employees? We have Burns as Hammond. It's right there. It is so easy. Like, put Lenny. Like, you have like the
my eye. I'm not supposed to get velociraptors in it.
Exactly. It's so, like, right there. It's right there. And we just like, it's those things like your layup, like, that's a layup. Why didn't we ever get it? And, like, it's not too late. You could easily, like, no one's gonna be upset if they did a Jurassic Park parody, or just a straight one. Like, why can't we get Jurassic Park instead of The Shining? Like, we got The Shining. The Shining is great. Can't we just get Jurassic Park as a no? Okay, we have Geriatric Park, and it's like, not great. I mean, there's also Itchy and Scratchy Land that is sort of, but that's more Westworld.
It's definitely more Westworld.
That's Crichton as well, but there's no dinosaurs.
No,
come on, man.
Frank does mention Chaos Theory or something like that at one point.
Yes, he does.
I watched it last night. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's there. The Itchy and Scratchy Land is there, but it's not quite the same. And I mean, it's good. Don't get me wrong. Itchy and Scratchy Land's a great episode, but yeah, and it's Westworld, and it's still in the Simpsons universe. Yes. There's no completely fantastical things in it, and I kind of want to see people get eaten by dinosaurs.
Yeah. So our last Treehouse of Horrors, they did that one bit where it's Simpsons Land instead of Westworld, and all of the scenes, so people could go and visit the Simpsons Land and revisit their favorite moments from the show and stuff like that. That was really clever. I thought.
Yeah,
that was put together
I like
really
that a lot. I honestly, this year's Halloween's, because they did the full It parody, which I love. I want full parody episodes, like I was talking about with Jurassic Park. They just did it with It, and that was good. The Jurassic Horror, proper Jurassic Horror was also good, and that weird meta thing was a lot of fun.
So I had to come up with some honorable mentions. I think Itchy and Scratchy Land was one of them, because it's not Jurassic Park specific. And then it's just like other fun dinosaur references. Obviously, Bart sells his soul, has a terrific moment where Bart has $5, gets the dinosaur sponge and thinks he's going to unleash it on Lisa. And then it's a disappointing failure. But
no, the sponges, yeah.
But that was a fun moment. The other one where dinosaurs show up is, I think, another Treehouse of Horrors where he wishes he didn't squish that fish with the magic toaster or something like that.
Oh, yeah, the Time and Punishment.
Is that what that's called?
It's called Time. I remember. It's the literary references will stick with me. So the Time and Punishment to Crime and Punishment.
Well, there's all kinds of.
I mean, Time and Punishment's a great Treehouse of Horrors segment. It's it's in Ray Bradbury. It's not a science fiction author, so it's hard to. It's like I would love to be the fly on the wall in some of those Simpsons writers' rooms and see how their thought process is, and even the bad years too. Like, I'm so curious to hear, like,
how does this work?
What do they talk like? Was there anyone in that room who'd be like, man, this is bad? And they'd be like, well, we have to turn it in. We don't have any more time. And you're like, well, okay. And like, is it as simple as that? Maybe it is. Maybe it is just like, oh, we are out of time. This is the best we can do.
Well, kind of speaking about running out of time, last time we spoke, you hadn't yet had time to finish reading the book. And then, God bless you, when you did finish, you emailed me back and said, I'm done and I'm ready. What makes Jurassic Park a rereadable book, do you think?
I mean, I use the word a breezy read. I feel like I should cringe when I say that, but I don't think it's not a bad thing. That's like, I write breezy books, I think, like, even if they're horror books and filled with blood and guts, but like they're quick and punchy, even though Jurassic Park's not like a short book, but the way it's structured and the way that it, like, Crichton was a master at crafting, at putting new hooks along the way to pull the reader through it. I mean, there's a lot, some of it's nostalgia. Like I've read it when I was a kid for the first time. I loved it. And I read it a lot when I was a kid, and rereading it now, it just makes me think of those times. It makes me think, and I think a lot of times, but I think Crichton's writing style is very approachable. And I push back whenever someone, usually a snooty person, goes, "It's easy. It's an easy read. Like, it's not a real book. Like, it has to be literature. It has to be. You have to like struggle to read a good book." I'm like, no, that's not true whatsoever. It's very readable, meaning it makes sense. It's like, and to be fair, Jurassic Park the book has a huge cast. There's a lot of moving parts, and it dances between all of them really well, and that helps, and it keeps things fresh, and it keeps keeps pulling you through that book. I think rereading it, I hadn't gotten the last time it was at airport, so I read a little past that when we got there. At this point, I've reread the whole thing, and this is the one thing I think I forgot between this and my last read. Lex, I can't. It's just that it's everything else is like, oh, this is great. I love it. You know, it's a lot of fun. It's this great adventure. Oh boy, Lex, the yelling. There's just a lot of a kid yelling at things, and like I like, it makes sense. A little girl, because she's much younger in the book than she is in the movie. The constant yelling about dinosaurs and being scared and wanting to, like, I'm hungry. I'm like, oh, shut up.
I find
he's trying to save you from dinosaurs, man. Yeah, like, calm down.
She doesn't get it. I because I'm looking at this so closely. I look at the ISO cam on every character, every chapter, and she is the most italicized character not for the best, right? But I don't know. Maybe Crichton just didn't know how to relate. She should be terrified. She should be like wet in her pants. She should be cowering. She should be, like, I've got nieces and nephews that, like, when they're shy, they're clinging to an adult or something, and Lex doesn't do that. She's just a brat, which is strange. Like, it and Crichton won't be the first guy that didn't write children well. It's not you watch any TV, kids just aren't done well. When they are done well, it's a masterpiece and they make it into the Netflix super series. But other than that, like, it's really challenging. Yeah, catching the voice of a 7-year-old. Obviously,
I mean, I think largely that explains why they aged up the kids for the movie. Like Tim in the movie is the younger child, but he's also older than even Lex is in the book. And Lex is a teenager, an early teen. Like, it makes sense. Like, oh well, we can give them a little bit more personality. They're not just like, when a kid is that little, they're not going to have that much. There's not going to be that much nuance when they're being chased by dinosaurs. And in the movie, they sell the trauma of the kids receive a little bit better. Like, it's a good mixture of that, the sense of wonder of being surrounded by these incredible creatures that have never existed with humans before, with the terror of, yes, but they are also incredibly dangerous because we have never lived with them before. We and, like, that is it's a theme of the novel and the movie. Is just like, this is dangerous. This is not something you can just do on a lark. You're basically, like, unleashing monsters on the world on the world again, and you can't control them. And I think that's another theme, is the control of, like, we think, oh, we can, because we created it, we can control it. And the idea of chaos theory, and, like, these things are inherently uncontrollable. Lex, it stood out to me. Like, I think that's like, I was rereading, I'm like, and I'm engrossed, and I'm falling around, and they're getting, it's the other, like, another thing that came up is very much the adaptation to the movie. And it's like, it's another, like, there's very, very few books where I can point at the movie and say it's as good or better. And in this case, well, like, it's like this in Fight Club. Like, those are my two go-tos, like, where I say, like, are there, people ask that question, like, are there any movies that are actually better than the books? I'm like, better is a hard word. Nature of adaptation makes them so inherently different. Like, a book is not a movie, and a movie is not a book. But I look at the, like, Fight Club the book versus Fight Club the movie. The experience is as good, like, of ingesting that story. Sure. And Jurassic Park is the same way, where the nature of adapting it to a movie and obviously Spielberg, he's a master, and I think he's a good analog for Crichton in a film world in that he is very good at crafting like digestible stories while still maintaining a strong sense of art and artistic vision. Like you still understand like Spielberg he's still making movies obviously, but there is, you know, like if you talk about a film and you call it's very Spielbergian, you know what that means. Everyone has a language. And when I describe my own book as Crichton-esque, that is also, you understand that immediately. You know what that means. And I think the movie benefits by being, it's a movie. It's only 90 minutes. A book is long. You have to have, you know, a journey through. You can just shortcut a movie and like suddenly, where did, you know, the kids and Grant, you don't need to watch them trudging through a jungle for 3 hours. They just jump and suddenly, oh, there's Gallimimus and there's daylight. even though we don't see what happens in between, like they are sleeping in a tree, and oh look, it's a Vegisaurus, and then suddenly it's daylight and there's Gallimimus.
You make a good observation, I think, earlier with the concept of the breezy read. We'll use that in quotes. But the idea that taking that concept, something excellent, something exciting, and then making it more broadly accessible. And then maybe Spielberg did that. There is a lot of artistry in terms of how do you put these movies together, and he's become one of the most popular directors of all time. And when he does things like Saving Private Ryan and things like that, where maybe not everybody goes to see a film like this, but when he makes them, they have a connectivity to the public that really extends beyond just like a niche audience. Like it's not just action adventures. It's like when a punk band has like a slow single and it hits the country station or something like that, and all of a sudden it's their biggest single because it's just a whole new audience that is able to connect with it. And I wonder if Crichton and Spielberg were able to capture into that vein, that they could take something special and niche-y but make it for everyone.
I mean, it comes back around to you connect to the characters. You connect to the approachable character that you can see yourself in, that is not a perfect person. They are flawed, even in things like Jurassic Park, where it's like they're not going through big character arcs, but like I think like those are the two big differences between the book and the movie that I think are good. The change is Lex aging up the kids, but also Hammond. I think Hammond in the movie is much more interesting to me than Hammond in the book. Hammond in the book is more just like a kind of bumbling idiot, really. He's rich, and like it works in a different way. It's not that it's bad. And it kind of has to be that way. Nedry is the clear antagonist, human antagonist in the movie, while Hammond is more just like he's elderly, but he has this like dream, he has this vision. Oh, this is what I'll do. It'll be like the circus. You know, he has like you see he is the one who has really the arc, because he realizes like, oh no, this is a bad idea. I should have done this, because his grandchildren are in danger, and he all these people get killed by these dinosaurs, and he's just like, this is a mistake. There's humanity in that. There's humanity in, I have this dream and I want to accomplish it. I'm going to go to great lengths to do it. And then I realized it was a mistake. And that's something that a lot of people can, everyone has a goal and a dream in life. And then you realize, I have to pivot. I have to change. I have to change my mind.
I've seen the error of my ways. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's humanity. You can recognize the humanity of these people, and you connect it back to what made the golden era of The Simpsons great. It is that humanity. I often criticize newer episodes of The Simpsons because this is not human behavior. Like humans don't act like this. These are cartoon characters, and that is how you connect to somebody. You recognize their core humanity. And even Nedry in the book, that's another thing that I picked up, is very much like even Nedry, who's ostensibly the villain. I did notice there's I think there's a subtle kind of anti-capitalist thing going on at parts, because Hammond is this rich guy. He thinks he can just do whatever he wants because he's on his own island, and he has no laws really forbidding him. It's very it reminds me of Ayn Randian kind of a villain from BioShock, even where I'm sure BioShock took stuff from Jurassic Park. I almost guarantee it. But it is that like, and like Nedry, I understand the Nedry in the book better than I understand. Like I empathize with him a little bit because you're like, everyone has had that boss who's like, this is the deal. You need to do more work. I'm like, well, you didn't pay me to do more work. And everyone has that in their mind. Like, God, you get, you rumble under your breath and you're stuck there. You have to do the work because it will hurt you in the long run. And then Nedry, you're like, he's like, Nedry's not necessarily like, oh, I'm going to unleash dinosaurs on everyone. He's just like, I'm just going to steal some stuff from them, take the money and run. They won't even notice it until I'm gone. And then things fall apart.
I picture Nedry, what happens to him. Do you remember the film The Life of Pi?
Yes. Yeah.
And so they very publicly bankrupted the special effects company that made the lion. The lion was legit. It was super good, but they were budgeted to do it, and then the overages bankrupt them to finish the film. And I don't know what ever happened to those people, but like, yeah, that film, which was really cool, a good film, great book. It killed a whole company of people who were working pretty hard and doing good jobs. And I picture Nedry's kind of like that company in that he got this gig, he was contracted to do it, then they changed the parameters, and he wasn't going to make any money on it. He was losing money on it. He couldn't afford to keep working on it. And so this opportunity to get a little money back was really just getting even, like not even getting vengeance. It was just, how do I move forward?
Yeah, it's a little bit more understandable than the Nedry in the movie, who seems just greedy, like they.
He's doing it for fun almost. He's childish in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly. And then you hired Wayne Knight, who he's great at that particular, he's good in that kind of role where he's like childish and cartoonishly evil. To like Newman and Seinfeld is that same kind of like. He just seems to thrive on causing chaos and mayhem within Jerry's life in Seinfeld, and it's like Nedry is not too far removed, just a little bit. He's just smarter, but not too smart because he still gets et by a Dilophosaurus.
Yeah, he's a good comedic actor for sure.
Yeah,
he's
exactly.
really good at that.
But that's not that's the thing. Like, he's a good comedic actor. He's not Sam Neill. He's not Samuel L. Jackson. No. He's for that perfectly for that supporting comedic role. But in this case, he's like the antagonist. He's like, he's gonna set that chain into motion. But he's really just an agent of chaos, and literally in this case, he is like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's interesting to me. The fact that I think Crichton does it very well. It mixes that different kind of layers of thematic element where it's like you have discussions about chaos theory throughout the book and the movie. But then you have actual people kind of represent those agents of chaos. Like you have, and that's the way I can respect Lex in the kind of in sometimes really insane behavior, but she's a kid. Kids do act crazy sometimes. It was really funny. During the holidays, I went on a drive-through safari with my niece, and she's only 3, and you drive through and you see, there's gazelles and there's zebras and stuff like that. And they're pretty close to the car, but they're not dangerous. It's not Jurassic Park, but it is that kind of experience of like you're driving through and she's a little girl and she's just like suddenly scared of an emu, and like that is the thing. Like, emus, like, that's a dinosaur.
Yeah,
like that's the thing where you drive by and there's like big emu like right next to the car, and it's as tall as the car. It's huge and has like the dinosaur, like, looks like dinosaur talons on the end of its feet, and you're like, man, that's just a dinosaur. Like, they got it. Like, it's right. It's birds. And it's just like, and you're like, I get it. Why you would be scared. You'd be terrified if one of those things came up to you. Yeah.
There's a lot of things out there that they've got it in their head that they're going to come and take what you got, that it would be bad news for, like, even a squirrel. Like, if it decided, hey, I want what's in your pockets. Like, oh my God, get off of me.
Right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's those, and I think that's the other, I really do like the fact that they have the compies as like an actual danger in the book, and they don't. There's no more time in that movie's kind of like a perfect movie, so I don't want to say, they should have that. And they do use the compies in the
second one,
in the second one, so it's there. I like, and you talk about the changes, like the book has the water scenes. I love the water. Well, like and they use those in some of the sequels. unfortunately, the sequels just aren't as good movies.
Well, I think it's the same matter as with the Simpsons, in that as they move forward, they lose that character-centric perspective. And you're right, what Spielberg did really elevated what Crichton did, really did. And I think it's because it's got that character-centered focus. Even at the end of the film, it was so contrived, like, oh, we got to wrap this up. And Grant's like, I'm not going to recommend endorse your park. And Hammond says, I agree, or something like that. That's it.
Yeah,
But like, oh, he's come full circle.
agree.
Okay. And then they hop on it. Like, they have a little moment outside the center where they're running for their lives. There's like a bloodbath happening around the corner. You're like, I don't know, we'll stop and we'll chat about this, hop in the van, and be on our way.
I mean, it is. I think it is the difference in cinema over the years, where the Joss Whedon-esque like quips superhero stuff has infected everything. So much of art now is just every character is comedy now. Every character has quips. There's no serious characters really. Even the serious characters are played for laughs because they are so serious. I don't know. You watch 94 Jurassic Park, and yeah, they have that quip there at the end. There's little quips here and there, but it maintains that tone where, yeah, it keeps it like it is that is that right balance, I think, and it feels so different. Even though it is like, yeah, there's a bloodbath happening. They just outran a swarm of velociraptors, dodging into like ductwork in a ceiling and hiding in freezers and locking them and then a T-Rex bursts in and is fighting velociraptors in honestly an incredibly epic thing.
Yeah.
With a banner falling, bursting through the old T-Rex fossil. It's perfect. And they have that quip in there at the end. But I feel like a part of it is the Williams score, where because the music changes and therefore the tension is kind of released, and they're like, oh, they're safe now. Yeah. Because the music and like it feels very much like, oh, they're safe, even though there's like dinosaurs, like that terrible monster that you've been running from for a day basically is right behind you. Maybe it's less than 500 feet away and we're having quips, but because you're outside, the lighting has changed, the music has changed, it's communicated, you're safe now. It's okay for that quip to be there because you're not in danger. There's no quips like that when they're running from the velociraptors. If there's any humor at all, it is kind of black comedy. It is dark. It's like that when the arm, the lands on to Dr. Sadler.
Well, Malcolm kind of gets a few. Like, do you think they'll have that on the tour?
Oh, well, yeah.
Malcolm,
Jeff Goldblum,
the one exception.
There's also certain actors that can just break the rules. Jeff Goldblum is one of them.
You are going to have dinosaurs on your
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
he's got all the lines. Yeah,
that's beautiful.
And he's a fan favorite, I think, because they give him all the lines. But he nailed it. Yeah,
of course. He's Jeff Goldblum. He knows what he's doing.
Well, we are plumb out of time once again. But I'm so glad we had a chance to do this again. Thanks for coming back. Keep up the good work on the show. Tell people where they can go to sign up for your newsletter and check out
RobbieDorman.com is the website. It has everything. All links to all my things. Sign up for a newsletter. You sign up, you get 2 free books, exclusive books. But it will send send one every month. That's where you need to go. My newest book is The Other. It's Exorcist meets The Notebook. That's my shorthand elevator pitch. But thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad you were here. Thank you so much. All right, a great big thank you to Robbie Dorman for returning to the show. Thank you so much for coming back. I appreciate it. He let me know when he finished rereading the book and said, hey, I'm ready to come back on the show. And that's just the best. Thanks so much. The text this week is The Park, spanning from pages 244 to 251. In a synopsis, Muldoon leads the cleanup crew in the park to repair the fences. Meanwhile, Harding and Hammond are out wrangling the dinosaurs, which have escaped, and returning them to their paddocks. They all return to Control, where Muldoon argues with Hammond about not having any weapons strong enough to tackle the big Rex. As their argument spills into the hallway, John Arnold explains to Donald Gennaro all the reasons why he believes Ian Malcolm and his chaos theory are wrong, and therefore Jurassic Park is perfectly safe. Characters. Robert Muldoon. Muldoon is leading the cleanup crew on page 244. This project isn't a big job and should only take about 20 minutes. When Ramon points out the headlights near the river, Muldoon disregards them. A, he's got work to do, and B, getting away from the blinding spit of the Dilophosaurs becomes a priority. The repair crew removes the Protocarpus tree from the fence, and they have to replace some burst ceramic insulators. And to do that, Arnold will have to turn the fences off again to do the repairs on page 249. The radios are working again, now that we're no longer in the thick of the storm, and Arnold shuts just this section down, but Muldoon is worried about the Dilophosaurs. He can hear them hooting in the distance. Muldoon is unarmed and thus unequipped to extract the Tyrannosaur from the sauropod paddock, especially at night. On page 250, we're told. Back in the control room with Hammond and Harding, Muldoon is reiterating he's not going out into the park at night to try to stop the Tyrannosaur. No way, no how. It's a full-grown Tyrannosaur, and all they've got are 20cc tranquilizer darts, which are suitable for like 500-pound animals, not 8-ton animals. She won't even feel those darts. Now, Hammond's shrewd weapons management has finally come home to roost, and he's realized that there are no weapons capable of stopping the Rex, despite Muldoon's request for 3 larger weapons, and the singular one he was permitted has gone missing along with Nedry's jeep. It's your park, Mr. Hammond. You didn't want anybody to be able to injure your precious dinosaurs. Well, now you've got the Rex in with the sauropods, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. On page 250 and 251, Muldoon says. And then he walks straight out of the room. Mic drop. Hammond chases after him, and they continue their argument in the hall. Carlos. This is one of the workmen, and for now he is carrying a big power saw. That's all we know about him. Ramon, another of the workmen, this one has a Spanish accent and is likely one of the local workers from Costa Rica that's been employed at the resort that we were told of way back in episode 2, The Bite of the Raptor, where it is said that many of the local people were employed in construction on page 2. Ramon refers to Muldoon as Senor Muldoon, offering titular respect, and wants to make sure his boss is aware of the lights, which Muldoon ignores on page 245. Muldoon encourages Ramon to hurry. They don't want the Dilophosaurs finding them on page 249. Ramon is also a capable electrician, I believe. John Arnold. Arnold gets a bit glib in this chapter. It's his job to operate the park controls, and he feels like the park is almost under control again, which gives him a sense of pride and perhaps allows him to gloat a bit. And Crichton describes this as being, quote, in an expansive mood on page 245. Arnold isn't necessarily a villain in this novel, in so much as like John Hammond is portrayed, but he is filled up to the rim with the tragic sin of hubris. And this moment where he laughs at the Malcolm effect and braggadociously declares that Malcolm is, quote, wrong, is a warning flare that he's gonna get his comeuppance in a Crichton novel. Quote, you mean you want me to tell you why Ian Malcolm is wrong? Asks Arnold. It's implied that Arnold feels that Hammond only invited Malcolm to apply chaos theory to Jurassic Park because it was the trendy thing to do. Malcolm predicted that the behavior of the system, as plotted in phase space by applying chaos theory, has inherent instabilities and that Jurassic Park could, quote, suddenly collapse. And while chaos theory is useful in describing real systems, Arnold didn't view it this way. He still feels like this is a computer model working in theoretical space, and so they, quote, disagreed with it and ignored it, of course, on page 246. This is due to Arnold's unflinching belief that he is correct and that the, quote, hell of a goddamn system that they're operating at Jurassic Park fills him with great pride. Quote, we're dealing with living systems after all. This is life, not computer models. He'll, of course, be punished for this. Arnold doubles down on rejecting chaos theory on page 247. He explains, living systems are not like mechanical systems. They are never in equilibrium. They're inherently unstable. They may seem stable, but they're not. Everything is moving and changing. In a sense, everything is on the edge of collapse. With, quote, body temperature serving as an example of the constant fluctuation of a living system, Arnold convinces Gennaro that living systems are inherently unstable on page 248. And when Gennaro begins to question him on his perspective on the difference between Malcolm's calculations and their implications on living and mechanical systems, Arnold cuts him off. He doesn't want to hear any more about Malcolm, especially from Gennaro, who doesn't know anything. Arnold presents the data on the screens showing that the park is almost back online, except the telephones. Recall, there were only 3 cutouts in the fence, which is pretty good, all things considered. Quote, and that's not theoretical. That's a fact. When requested by Muldoon to shut off a section of the fence for repairs, he complies on page 249, but otherwise Arnold has been working on restoring the phone lines. Upon discovering the down fence between the Tyrannosaur and Sauropod paddocks, Arnold says they'll have to get the T-Rex out of there, but Muldoon is unarmed. And Arnold knows and tells Muldoon that Hammond won't like them not trying to stop the Tyrannosaur from killing more dinosaurs on page 250. When Gennaro suggests that having an unstoppable Tyrannosaur in the park may indicate that Arnold doesn't actually have everything under control, Arnold denies him, saying, don't kid yourself. We have the park. It'll be done in a couple of hours. We may lose a couple dinos before we get the Rex out of there, but believe me, we have the park on page 251. Dr. Harding. He has gone off to transfer, quote, the animals on page 245. We'll learn that the Hypsilophodon and the Stegosaur are out of their paddocks. And recall the Stegosaur was beneath a tree in the Tyrannosaur paddock in the chapter Tim. While moving the Hypsilophodon, Harding is careful to ensure its head isn't hanging over the leather straps because it may impede circulation through the carotid artery, which is perhaps a detail where to read into his proficiency as a biologist and a veterinarian on page 246. Procedurally, the animal was tranquilized, hoisted up with leather straps, and loaded into the back of a flatbed truck. Harding is admitted to have guessed at the quantity of tranquilizer to bring down a 500-pound dryosaur. The risks were that they run off and collapse where they can't be reached, or that they experience cardiac arrest, but this one was caught perfectly. Harding resists Hammond's intrusive commands of the workers, asking him to stop shouting at them. When Hammond complains at some more, Harding pleads with his boss to let his workers do their work without the extra pressure. They are being careful, says Harding, pleading with Hammond to listen and quit shouting at his workers. Harding equips a cardiogram collar to monitor the Hypsi's heartbeat and uses a turkey baster-sized thermometer in its rectum. Again, these are all clinical observations that an adroit veterinarian would be making. And hey, we get some of Harding's backstory. No first name, but at least a little bit of his resume. He has been the chief of veterinary medicine at the San Diego Zoo and the world's leading expert on avian care on page 247. The world's leading expert. He consulted with zoos in Europe, India, and Japan on caring for exotic birds, but note, if you're from England, the common American robin becomes an exotic bird. So, if he's traveling to where the birds are, he's exotic to them. Literally, it means they're from a distant or foreign country. But if he travels to Europe to care for birds, the European birds in Europe are not exotic. But perhaps the emphasis here is that he is drawn to caring for birds that are exotic to him, and has familiarized himself with how to care for birds of many types from all over the world. I'm just taking umbrage with Crichton's use of exotic. Note, here's a fun piece of trivia. The Lost World's Dr. Sarah Harding is Jurassic Park's Dr. Harding's daughter. It is canon, and here's how. From page 258 of my edition of The Lost World, which I mentioned before, "How come you know all this anatomy?" Kelly said. And you don't have to know who Kelly is. She's just some kid asking Sarah Harding questions. Sarah responds, "I have to. I spent a lot of time looking through the scat of predators," she said, "examining pieces of bones that are left behind and figuring out which animals have been eaten. To do that, you have to know comparative anatomy very well." She moved the transducer along the baby's leg, and "My father was a vet," she adds. Malcolm looked up sharply. "Your father was a vet?" "Yes, at the San Diego Zoo. He was a bird specialist. But I don't see... Hey, can you magnify this?" Her father was named Harding, who was a bird specialist and vet from the San Diego Zoo, and upon hearing this, Malcolm specifically, quote, looked up sharply. This is conclusively an Easter egg hidden in The Lost World, bringing the two novels and the characters and their stories all together and a little more closely in this Jurassic Park universe. All right, that's an aside that's neither here nor there, but it's kind of neat. Going back to the story today, Harding first saw Hammond as a peculiar little man whom he had no interest in page 247, but Hammond's impossible accomplishments presented something truly exotic, a new frontier for a medical ornithologist. Harding had an academic bent, and he was tempted to write the first textbook of veterinary internal medicine, Diseases of Dinosaurium. We learn he's ambitious, the best in his field, and was basically bored with studying birds. Dinosaurs revitalized his passion, and he's never regretted taking this job. On page 247, the novelty of it all was a great inspiration. He's developed, quote, considerable expertise in handling the dinosaurs medically, but he believes he's the expert and doesn't want to listen to Hammond. After returning the Hypsilophodon to its proper home, he injects Medrine, and it immediately recovers and slowly wakes up. On page 249. Harding and Hammond eventually return to the control room before the end of this chapter, which we know is about 10:30 p.m. When asked by Hammond, Harding asserts that the Rex can feed off of a single sauropod kill for several days, as if they've had some experience with this. I mean, I would suppose one could calculate how much a Rex eats and divide that by the total tonnage of a sauropod and predict how long a kill might last, but that's not quite how this part reads, though. And John Hammond. He has joined Dr. Harding to transfer the animals in the park on page 245. Arnold says that Hammond, quote, loves the latest scientific fad, so he had asked Malcolm to model the system at Jurassic Park on page 245. While moving the Hypsilophodon, Hammond is shouting for the workers to be careful on 246. He sort of argues with Harding over the welfare of the Hypsilophodon and continues to fret over its vitality on page 247. When the Hypsilophodon is returned to her paddock, Hammond appears worried that it's drooling, not hopping, and continuing to show his great concern for the animals, yet there's no mention while they're out in the park that he's looking or scanning the foliage for his grandkids and Dr. Grant. You'd think you'd be sending up a flare or calling out to them, but nope, Hammond's not thinking that way. which is beyond mysterious because it's inhuman. And fully within his character, I guess. Arnold implies that Hammond will be very upset that the Tyrannosaur is being left unmitigated in the sauropod paddock, where she'll surely kill some dinosaurs. Hammond returns to the control room after being out with Harding and paces, on page 250, worrying about how many sauropods the Rex will kill. Hammond, though, doesn't want any sauropods killed and wants to go out into the park to stop it, tonight. When Muldoon refuses to go out after the Rex in the nighttime, unarmed, Hammond pulls the "Are you forgetting you work for me" card, which always goes over well, and he's rising up and down on the balls of his feet, which he always does when he is angry. He suggests they get the Rex with the tranquilizer darts and wonders where the larger weapons are, and wonders who's to blame that Nedry stole the rocket launcher, but Muldoon won't take any of Hammond's guff, gives him a perfunctory rebuffing, and exits the room. Hammond hates that, and chases after him, continuing their argument into the hallway. Workmen. There are plural workmen here, likely two. Harding would be administering the tranquilizer and perhaps overseeing the health of the animals, but the workmen are tying the straps and operating the hoist and driving the flatbed truck. Donald Gennaro. Gennaro continues serving as the audience's proxy, asking questions and giving Arnold and Malcolm reasons to elaborate on things they'd otherwise not be saying, on page 245. This time he's curious about the Malcolm effect. When Arnold starts discussing constant change in the inherent instability of living systems, Gennaro becomes a, quote, straw man sounding board who offers up a few routine fly balls for Arnold to field so we, as readers, can get a greater understanding or explanation about Arnold's argument for living systems, on page 247. Again, Gennaro is the reader's proxy, asking questions so, through dialogue, Crichton can explain what's going on and why. Gennaro continues to prompt Arnold for a few more paragraphs, so Arnold's perspective on his argument with Malcolm can be fleshed out fully, on page 248. Though when Arnold rather matter-of-factly says that Malcolm doesn't know what he's talking about, Gennaro responds as any of us probably would. Are you sure he didn't understand all that? He seems pretty clear on the difference between living and non-living, on 248, but Arnold cuts him off. What's happening now? Asks Gennaro in his exposition-inducing way as Arnold reveals that they discovered the fences down indicating the Rex has entered the sauropod paddock on page 250, and upon witnessing Muldoon and Hammond's quarrel over the lack of weaponry to stop the Rex, Gennaro suggests to Arnold, quote, I guess you don't have control of the park yet after all, on page 251, because the Tyrannosaur is unstoppable. Dr. Ian Malcolm. We get a bit of a rundown on Malcolm from John Arnold's perspective. A little condescending, quote, Ian Malcolm is a mathematician specializing in chaos theory. Quite amusing and personable, but basically what he does, besides wear black, is use computers to model the behavior of complex systems. To Arnold, he says he dismissed Malcolm because, quote, he's just another theoretician. Sitting in his office, he made a nice mathematical model and never occurred to him that what he saw as defects were actual necessities, on 248. The inherent instabilities in a model are indicative of a living system, he argues. While a little wobble can get worse until the whole system collapses in a mechanical system, they are essential to living systems. They are indicative that a system is healthy and responsive. Arnold is expressly trying to get the phones up and running so they can get Malcolm a doctor, on page 249. Hypsilophodons. This has a green head with dull eyes, and its tongue hangs out of its mouth, on page 246. Recall Hypsilophodons are one of the species on the island discovered to be breeding, so this animal may be a male. The motion sensors only spot a single new Hypsi, so they may not be great at breeding, or, more likely, I believe we're to accept that they're breeding just fine, but the rampant, explosive, problematic velociraptor population is preying upon the eggs and newborns. It's described as a small drysaur, 7 feet long, weighing about 500 pounds. She was dark with green mottled brown spots and is breathing slowly. Harding reads its heart rate with a cardiogram collar and measures its temperature with a turkey baster-sized electronic thermometer, which presents a 96.2 degree temperature, which is down 1.5 degrees from the animal's usual temperature. I guess if you're reading a big rectum's temperature, you need a big thermometer. Oh, and a side note, 96.2 degrees is my wife's, I think, favorite band from back in the 90s. I think it was 96.2 degrees. That was the name of the band. After being loaded up and her vitals are stable, Harding is ready to get the Hypsi back into her paddock. When recovering from anesthetization, it snorts and kicks its powerful hind legs, on page 248, and drools and moves slowly without hopping, and will continue for about an hour until this sedative wears off. Tyrannosaurus. They discover the Tyrannosaur has entered the sauropod paddock, which Muldoon says will make for fine dining tonight. Dilophosaurs. We're reminded that the Dilophosaurs always stay near the river, on 244, that they're dangerous for their spitting, and thus could pose a threat to the workers even if they're separated by the fence, and we have them referred to as Dilos, as their nickname. The Dilos, quote, hoot while the repairs are being made, and it makes Muldoon hurry. Localities. In the park. This spot in the park is near the cutout by the Jungle River, which we can hear gurgling nearby on page 244. It's also near where Nedry left the gas jeep behind, which can be spotted, quote, to the east through the jungle, which Ramon spotted as they were, quote, were coming out on page 245. So this scene is set distantly to the west of where Nedry almost crashed his jeep into that concrete wall earlier. Theoretically, the compies must be crawling all over Nedry's corpse at this very moment, but there is no indication of this yet. Recall there are 3 cutouts in the park, we're told, and this one is near the Jungle River. In this region of the park, small protocarpus trees were planted because their feathery leaves conceal the fence from view. The other cutouts are by the sauropod paddock and the tyrannosaur paddock, but we discovered that one of the protocarpus trees broke free of their guy wires, and metal turnbuckles shorted out the fence. The ground crews were supposed to have used plastic-coated wires and ceramic turnbuckles near the fences so this type of problem would be avoided, but, quote, it happened anyway, says the novel, probably from Muldoon's point of view. Once again, as in almost every reference to the Jungle River, Crichton reaffirms that the Dilophosaurs, quote, always stayed close to the river on page 244. There's a fence between the workmen and the river, but the Dilophosaurs can spit through the fence, of course, and the fence is described as silver. The Hypsy paddock. Presumably, the Hypsilophodon is returned to this paddock. All we're told about it is that there is a field and ground, and there are quartz lights, though those lights may be originating from the flatbed truck that delivered it here. I don't know. Quartz lights doesn't seem like headlights. It sounds like the ground lights that they have in the park. Sauropod Maintenance Building. A low concrete roof is on the Sauropod Maintenance Building, a utility structure used for equipment, feed storage, and so on page 249. They're all around the park, in each of the paddocks, we're told. Like the sauropod paddock. From the camera by the Sauropod Maintenance Building, the Tyrannosaur paddock's fence appears like a shining wall of metallic mesh in the quartz light. On page 250, it's been trampled, knocked flat, and this indicates that the Tyrannosaur not only broke through the fence at the main road and out of her enclosure, but also through this section of the fence separating her from the sauropods and hadrosaurs too. They are surprised because, recall, in the previous chapter, they believe the cutout was likely due to a fallen tree. Finding that the Tyrannosaur is in among the sauropods presents a significant challenge. Allusions and references. The Protocarpus tree. I'm not sure that this is a real thing. I looked it up and see that there are trees that are referred to as Protocarpus, but there are much more real plants of a very similar description called Podocarpus, a genus of conifer, which is part of the podocarp family of low-maintenance shrub. So this might be a typo or misunderstanding, or it might be a real plant, but I'm guessing the latter, to be honest. We've seen a few instances where something sounds very close to the real thing, but is just off a little bit, like the hemotoxins, which are a real thing, and the helotoxins, which are not real things. It sounds convincing, but doesn't hold up upon a closer inspection. The Malcolm effect. We're finally going to get a bit of an explanation as to what this is. It's been alluded to twice now by Hammond and Malcolm, and the audience's proxy question asker, Gennaro, who needs to have everything explained to him, is here to ask questions about it. Arnold says expressly, I just told you the park is back in hand, with no catastrophic Malcolm effect. So Arnold's literally tempting his fates now. I'll get more into the details of the Malcolm effect as we discussed the water dripping down your hand analogy later on in this episode. Carotid arteries. Harding ensures that the carotid artery of the Hypsilophodon isn't impeded. This artery delivers blood to your brain and head and face on page 246, if you were wondering. That the animal has dull eyes and a slack tongue may be an indication that the carotid artery is being impeded, but I think that we're to read that its eyes are dull and its tongue dangles because she has been tranquilized. Medrine. This is a drug Dr. Harding injects into the anesthetized Hypsilophodon to snap it out of its sedation. The animal awakens almost immediately as a result on page 248. Medrine as a drug doesn't appear to be a thing, but it sounds like a drug. There's midodrine that aids with low blood pressure. There's Medrol, which is an anti-inflammatory drug, but it appears that Medrine, in and of itself, isn't a thing. Again, Crichton has a medical doctorate. He's preparing to create the show ER with Spielberg while he's writing this manuscript based on his time as a med student. He should know this stuff. So perhaps this was intentional? Recall he called hemotoxins helotoxins and made up beta alkaloids, which were probably beta carboline alkaloids. And most egregiously, he called an injured worker who had been mauled by a velociraptor a sick worker, as if he had somehow shared a toothbrush with someone that had active source in its mouth and contracted a mauling that way somehow. Whatever Medrine is, it isn't a good illusion or inclusion, and from a med school student, we should expect more from Crichton, I think. Unless there's a good reason to not include specific scientific descriptions of these things for, legal purposes. All right, stylistic techniques. Italics, a very fashionable theory. Very trendy to apply to any complex system where there might be unpredictability on page 245. Here, the emphasis is on fashionable, implying that it was unnecessary to apply chaos theory to Jurassic Park. It was only done to be trendy. Constantly, on page 248, stresses Arnold about body temperature changes. The emphasis is a reaffirmation of his confidence in this argument. Colon's use. They had difficulty finding the shortened section at first because there wasn't much to see. Colon. A small protocarpus tree was leaning against the fence on page 244. Here, the colon is used to present an object in the sentence. In this case, it's also an object in the real world, a protocarpus tree. And I feel like a semicolon could also have done this equally well. It beeped. Colon. 96.2 degrees on page 247. This is pretty good. The thermometer signals that it's performed a reading, and then the colon presents what that reading is. This is straightforward, absent of rhetoric. It's clinical in its reporting, which is entirely sufficient in this context, and I like it. Quote, but to be the first person to care for a whole new class of animals, colon, that was something. 247. Again, the dinosaurs aren't the important part. What's important is presented by the colon, that it's the novelty that has lured Harding. The scarcity, the rarity, the oddity of the work. He was otherwise bored with his career. Apparently there was nothing new to add to medical care. If you believe that. Quote, look, colon, when I was working on missiles, we dealt with something called resonant yaw on page 248. So here, the look is introducing an object for Gennaro to observe, in this case, part of Arnold's past work experience. Semicolons. Quote, of course, none of this should have happened. Semicolon. Grounds crews were supposed to use plastic-coated wires and ceramic turnbuckles near fences on 244. The semicolon here smacks these two clauses together efficiently. Although he was tired, Arnold was feeling good. Semicolon. He was even in a mood to indulge the lawyer, Gennaro, on 245. Here we have two clauses stuck together. They're related, so it's not unusual to use a semicolon here. Quote, in the late 20th century, veterinary medicine was scientifically advanced. Semicolon. The best zoos ran clinics little different from hospitals on 247. Here, two clauses are sufficiently connected by the semicolon, the second half elaborating well on the premise presented in the first half. She was still breathing shallowly. Semicolon. There was no ocular reflex yet. And here we have two indicators that the tranquilizer is still holding its effect over the specimen, which is what they want, because it's a worry that she may wake up prematurely and become challenging to work with, or worse, injure herself trying to escape. The sauropods are big. Semicolon. The Rex can feed off a single kill for several days, says Harding. The statement and then elaboration presented as connected clauses conjoined by the semicolon. Ellipses. But when he learned what Hammond had done, ellipsis, it was impossible to pass up. Here, the ellipsis represents a pause, symbolically representing the pause Harding took when considering Hammond's proposal. This ellipsis represents him changing his mind, but it also perhaps represents the omission of restating what it is that Hammond has done. That's not mentioned here. So you're saying, ellipsis, on page 248, offers Gennaro. He is egging Arnold to continue elaborating on his point about living systems. In fact, there's just that third section of fence, ellipsis, on 249. Here, this ellipsis is heavy with dramatic irony. If there were a Malcolm effect possible to plunge the park into utter collapse, it's written in that pause. And we're looking at a big hole in the fence that needs to be repaired to solve this problem. It doesn't get any worse with the next ellipsis. We're turning the camera now to get a look at the fence, ellipsis. That empty space as we wait holds some tension in it too. What are we going to see? Well, it's the size of the hole the Tyrannosaur came through. M-. Well, they should be careful, M-, says Hammond when he's interrupted, cut off by Harding, who says they are being careful, as if he were snapping back at his boss. The M- suggests that he's snapping back at Hammond, and the italics further suggest he's emoting strongly, again, like he's snapping back at his boss, which I think is great, but there's no exclamation mark. Who snaps back at someone without exclamation? Apparently Harding does? I don't prefer this reading, but I think we have to take it as Crichton presents it. Harding sort of is pleading, or maybe even whining to Hammond. But they are being careful. Can't you see? I really prefer the snappy comeback, where he's more defiant. Now he just feels wimpy. But I think it's in alignment with what Crichton intended. Quote, he seems pretty clear on the difference between living and non-living M- on 248. Is Gennaro being cut off by Arnold, who doesn't want to hear any Malcolm defending while he's making his case that the park is back online. This is good for showing character, too. Arnold hasn't any time for Malcolm's crackpot theories. That's a fact. Quote unquote. Exclamation, careful, careful, on 246, shouts Hammond as people are moving the tranquilized Hypsilophodon. This further reinforces that Hammond cares deeply about the well-being of these animals, and perhaps that he insists on having control of a situation, thus can't help but direct and command people as they're doing their work. He continues, watch it, easy, with exclamation. Literary techniques, similes. They look like a weird twisted ship's propeller, according to Malcolm. The behavior of any system follows the surface of the propeller, referring to Malcolm's models in phase space. Here, we can imagine the spinning spirographic shape of a ship's propeller, thicker and more robust than, say, an airplane propeller. And in fact, we don't have to really imagine them at all, because Crichton presents pictures of these shapes at the beginning of each iteration, and they most appear, quote, like weird twisted ship's propellers in the 7th iteration, if you check that out on page 365, the 6th iteration on page 315, and the 5th iteration on page 269. Dramatic irony. Some more dramatic irony presents itself as Ramon points east through the jungle at, quote, the lights on page 244, which look like, quote, the lights of a car, but it is not moving on 245. We know that this is the gas jeep that Nedry stole, and also that it has Muldoon's rocket launcher, which he prepped earlier, and he wants both of these things, but doesn't realize that this is what he's looking at, and so disregards it. But we know what it is, and realize how close he has come to getting his hands back on the only weapons worth a damn on this island. A few pages later, John Arnold says that they've got the park back under control, and see, there was no Malcolm effect. We're just fine on page 249. In fact, they're just, quote, that third section of fence, and that final ellipsis shows that there's surely at least something that's not under control that may lead to the Malcolm effect, after all. Great instruments of dramatic irony here. Analogy. The Malcolm effect. The weird ship's propeller is a model in phase space. Arnold argues that his hand is an analogy for the model, in that water may run over the surface of our hand in any sort of ways, but it must flow over our hand's surface. That is predictable. The analogy extends to the model of Malcolm's chaos theory. The, quote, behavior of a whole system is like a, quote, drop of water in this analogy. We know that the system may behave in many different ways, but the limits are contained within the model's plotted points. Quote, the drop may spiral down or slip outward toward the edge. It may do many different things, depending. But it will always move along the surface of the propeller, says Arnold in 246. So you can imagine that this is like plotting a graph, and given the formula, it will take a certain shape, and all the plot points within the graph fall within this shape. The strange dragon curve model in phase space that resembles a, quote, weird twisted propeller is just a complicated example of a type of graph, but it still operates like a graph. Some of these plot points, however, are like when you start reaching an asymptote, or the plot points begin making dramatic changes. Rather than an asymptote, Arnold says that Malcolm's models feature a ledge or a sharp incline, and the analogous drop of water will, quote, speed up greatly on 246. This increase in speed or sharp incline is the Malcolm effect. When the speed increases greatly, the entire system suddenly collapses. Another analogy to living systems incorporating instability is how a body's temperature changes constantly, even over a 24-hour cycle, changing with one's mood, exercise, and the outside temperature, busting Gennaro's straw man argument on 248, and reaffirming Arnold's perspective. Then Arnold offers another analogy, that mechanical systems, notably opposite to living systems according to Arnold, don't incorporate instability, as is the case with resonant yaw. Resonant yaw means that even though a missile was only slightly unstable off the pad, it was hopeless. It was inevitably going to go out of control, and it couldn't be brought back. That's a feature of a mechanical system. A little wobble can get worse until the whole system collapses. So we have two analogies showing perfectly natural instability in a living system and collapsing instability in mechanical systems. And Arnold argues instabilities are fine because this is a living system at Jurassic Park. They shouldn't collapse because it's a living system. The instabilities should be there. Some dialogue. So I'm conflicted. The back and forth between Harding and Hammond has me of two minds. The first is the reading of their dialogue that I'm most drawn to. Harding cuts off Hammond, his boss, snapping back at him that they are being careful. Harding has demonstrated that he doesn't care much for John Arnold, saying that he's a worrywart and won't listen to him when he's asking for the gas jeep to be returned, recall. Ellie has to convince Harding to turn back, even though Arnold's commands are obviously urgent. So Harding has already demonstrated he sort of drums to his own beat here. Now we have him evidently interrupting his boss with emphasis in his statement, as indicated by the M- and italics, but there's no exclamation, and I needed that exclamation to fit there. Just next, in Harding's backstory, we learn that he sees Hammond as a peculiar little man with whom he had, quote, no interest. Again, Harding doesn't look up to, possibly doesn't quite respect Hammond. Again, this snappy comeback is in character, but it's not in the text. Instead, we get a frustrated veterinarian, the best in the world, hired because he was the best in his field, becoming micromanaged on the one thing that he's exclusively the only person in the whole world that's experienced and knowledgeable in this field about, prostrating himself toward Hammond. Without the exclamation mark, the frustration is boiling over. It's being shoved down. And that is further enforced when Hammond asks, "How is she?" in the very next line, and Harding answers without any sign of frustration. "She's fine. She's only dropped a degree and a half." And then goes on to continue defending his decisions and medical opinion to his boss. Hammond has a knack for neutering his characters like Wu. Here he's supplicated the world's greatest avian medical practitioner in Harding. We already know that he's disarmed the great white hunter in Muldoon. For peculiar little man, his ambition, power, wealth, but most importantly his dream to make Jurassic Park a reality, has made him the authority on this island, and everyone is powerless to stop him from making mortal mistakes. Discussion. Timeline. By a statement given by Gennaro, quote, "About an hour went by," on page 249, we can deduce that the fence repairs and Hypsilophodon containment in this chapter occur between 9:30 and 10:30 p.m. Island layout. We're told that each paddock has a utility building, which have low roofs and are made of concrete, containing equipment and feed storage. Funny, the Jurassic World Evolution game doesn't incorporate these in their park designs. But every paddock should have a utility building. Believe me, I know. Once again, we have a character that says, "Believe me," and then is proven to be entirely incorrect. This time it's John Arnold. He asserts, quote, "We have the park," and should Gennaro suggest otherwise, he retorts, "Don't kid yourself." And he even permits, quote, "We may lose a couple of dinos before we get the Rex out, but," and here it is, "Believe me, we have the park," on page 251. These are famous last words in Jurassic Park. Crichton just loves to use them. Contrivances and plot. Okay, so recall the Fini.object command restored power to the park, but deleted all traces of Nedry's work with the White Rabbit object. And this restored command to the park, except for the telephones. The phone lines are still down. This is useful in building plot, so the heroes can't call for help. It makes them more desperate. In this case, they cannot call the mainland to notify the ship that it's infested with raptors, nor can they radio for help to get a helicopter to save Malcolm's life. And recall, it only takes about 50 minutes for a helicopter to fly to the island. So this is sort of a contrivance of plot that Crichton has inserted to keep the stakes high and our heroes isolated. It's a little obtuse, but it's all right. I guess Nedry did something else also, in addition to shutting down all the security measures in the park, to the modems, too. Sure, why not? Note, in this chapter, we're told there is a flatbed truck at the park's fingertips on page 246. They could have, if this were truly an emergency, driven the flatbed truck out into the park, just like they are right now, wrangling up dinosaurs, and picked up the tourists during the storm outside the Tyrannosaur paddock. If anything, this flatbed truck would have had more capacity to carry Regis, Malcolm, Grant, Lex, and Tim than a single Jeep would have had as well. Admittedly, with fewer seatbelts for everyone, but they still could have done it, and they had it. They just didn't use it. It wasn't even a consideration. Lastly, a worker can see some headlights through the jungle foliage. We can recall that Nedry almost nearly crashed into the concrete barrier, missed slamming into it by, quote, a foot, as we're told on page 194, and it was very dramatic. Back in episode 36, Nedry. The front end of the car, where the headlights are therefore 12 inches away from the big concrete barrier. That concrete barrier is said to be 6 feet tall. If we put a set of headlights 1 foot away from a 6-foot-tall wall, they would be only visible from a very specific perspective, and most likely via indirect light. It'd be, in other words, very unlikely you'd see, especially from any distance, or any great distance, these lights. Crichton wrote the incredibly close call with the concrete barrier to be dramatic, but it's affecting the viability of the rest of his story here. Chaos theory. So here's Arnold's take on chaos theory, and I think we're supposed to accept this as true. Chaos theory describes nonlinear systems used to study everything from the stock market to heart rhythms. It has become, quote, very trendy to apply to any complex system where there might be unpredictability. On page 245, Malcolm's models are all phase space shapes on a computer screen which look like a weird and twisted ship's propeller. According to Malcolm, the behavior of any system follows the surface of the propeller. Imagine a drop of water on the back of your hand. The drop is going to run off your hand, maybe towards your wrist, maybe to your thumb, or between your fingers. It's not positively predictable where the water will flow, but it can be predicted that it will run along the surface of your hand. It must. We're told on 245 and 246. Part of the island's descent into chaos is due to human error. From Muldoon's perspective, there are often issues with human error. First, the radios weren't charged, naturally, and now it's the ceramic turnbuckles and plastic-coated wires which weren't used on the fence. And as a side note here, like Muldoon is the park designer. These are his matters to oversee. They are likely his staff members that made these mistakes. So he's either not trained them well, or he's not inspecting their work properly. So Muldoon is sort of passing the buck here. when really the buck stops with him, right? Finally, we get to the point I've been waiting for regarding chaos theory, and ironically it comes from Arnold, who doesn't abide by chaos theory. Arnold says living systems are not like mechanical systems. They are never in equilibrium. They are inherently unstable. They may seem stable, but they are not. Everything is moving and changing. In a sense, everything is on the edge of collapse. On page 247, we're told. To step out of the conversation for just a second here, this is the subject of entropy. Entropy is an invisible force that brings disorder. Entropy is always tugging away at anything that's created to be in order. It's like building a tower out of blocks. Those blocks are put in order, but literally nothing is going to keep those blocks in the tower shape, whereas it feels like almost everything else around it is just a moment away from causing it to collapse. This is kind of like the invisible force of entropy. Sometimes that collapse is a shake in the floor, a gust of wind, some jerk little brother, but that tower, built in order, is going to come down. But the tower is a thing. Jurassic Park is discussing systems in this chapter. Entropy tugs away at everything that's been put in order, like Jurassic Park. Here in Jurassic Park, systems are affected by instability, but Arnold argues that living systems embrace instability, adapt and find balance. It's in their nature, whereas mechanical systems which experience instability crash and burn. Arnold is speaking to this concept of everything is moving and changing, and says, in a sense, everything is on the edge of collapse. Arnold offers the analogy of instability in a living system and how, quote, little wobbles are essential to a living system, as these wobbles are natural corrections in response to a natural world which is constantly changing. It's how living systems survive, creating what we observe as a natural balance. And recall, we'll have the topic of equilibrium appear later in this novel in terms of animal populations. The wobbles, quote, mean the system is healthy and responsive. These wobbles and recorrections are the living system dealing with entropy, pulling away at it. He counters with the analogy of instability in a mechanical system, which leads to catastrophe or collapse. His main argument is that Jurassic Park is a living system, not a mechanical system, and instability and natural corrections are essential for a responsive, successful living system. Instability must be expected, and recall the lesson from chaos theory is often that resiliency and preparations to be responsive to challenges is what makes a healthy system. Therefore, Ian Malcolm's observation that this is an unstable system is incorrect, but his interpretation that a living system can't survive with instability is false. Instability, according to Arnold, is essential for a living system. Arnold believes Malcolm is treating this like a mechanical system and so has disregarded Malcolm's paper. Which I guess leads us to our last comment here on Arnold and his opinions here. The subject is hubris. Please allow me to defer much of this section to the 7th edition of M.H. Abrams' Glossary of Literary Terms to be as enlightening as possible, and stay tuned. There are some really fascinating details coming up. So Arnold's surety in the control mechanisms at Jurassic Park, his extreme confidence in the park's operations in spite of Malcolm's warnings, and especially his total disregard for Malcolm's calculations for the park are his great pride. I feel like hubris gets a little misunderstood or overused, generally speaking, and as well tragedy, for that matter. So let's just get a little bit more specific, literarily speaking. Hubris is specifically an element of tragic tales. Tragedies commonly reach, quote, a disastrous conclusion for the protagonist, as primarily articulated by the Greek dramatic critic Aristotle. The story's tragic endings should arouse pity and fear for the purposes of catharsis of such emotions in the consumer. That is, you should feel pity and fear for the protagonist, and then feel better about your ability to face pity and fear when tragedy strikes your life later on. This is an opportunity to gain some sort of, quote, life experience from a drama to help you better navigate tragedy later in your life. For this purpose, drama can be incredibly important. When we say we love art, we're really saying we love art's ability to deliver us catharsis. So, the tragic hero is the one who is best, according to Aristotle, at arousing our pity and terror, and is described as being neither thoroughly good nor thoroughly bad, but a mixture of both. It would make for an interesting exercise to consider which characters are good, bad, and neutral in that sort of Dungeons and Dragons alignment system sort of way for this novel. The, quote, tragic effect will be even greater if the tragic hero is, quote, better than we are, in a sense that he is of a higher than ordinary moral worth. He is exhibited as suffering a change in fortune from happiness to misery because of his mistaken choice of an action, to which he is led by an error in judgment called hamartia, by ancient old Aristotle, which means his tragic flaw. Getting close to identifying John Arnold as one who may experience tragedy due to his hubris. So, hubris is pride, or overwhelming self-confidence which leads a protagonist to disregard a divine warning or to violate an important moral law. So can we consider John Arnold an Aristotelian tragic hero who falls victim to his own hubris? Well, he is really neither good nor bad. He suffers some change in fortune from happiness to misery due to mistakes he's made, i.e. disregarding Malcolm's warnings, as well as not realizing that the park was running on auxiliary power. That was his mistake too. He exhibits hubris, pride and overwhelming self-confidence, leading him to disregard a divine warning or violate an important moral law. And by this extension, Ian Malcolm is either serving as a divine warning or an important moral law. And that's a really interesting concept. Is Malcolm representing an important moral law, or is he providing a divine warning? Because, guys, if Malcolm is the agent of a divine warning, and he dies at the end of this novel, recall the Costa Rican government, quote, did not even permit the burial of Hammond or Malcolm on page 398, there's a whole Christ mythology to consider with the Ian Malcolm character. And then Malcolm returns from the grave for the sequel. My mind is like Jiffy Pop on the stove right now. A Christ analogy of Ian Malcolm must be looked into more closely, but at another time. Let's focus back on John Arnold. The, quote, divine warning could also be the deus ex machina of that severe tropical storm that couldn't be predicted, a natural occurrence which challenges the living system before returning to balance, or as the novel calls it, equilibrium. So yes, these elements of a tragic hero are present, but they're a bit incomplete. I don't believe Arnold ever realizes that he's suffering due to the mistakes he's made. He's not lived long enough to see the error of his ways, and so as readers, we don't get that immersive experience of seeing his fatality as a moment of fear and pity. Fear, yes. It's horrifying for sure, but not pity, which is sort of like a he should have known better moment, but more importantly, it's I should have known better moment, which we don't get from him. Also, he's not the protagonist or lead character in the novel, meaning these actions of his don't necessarily make this novel a tragic story in a pure Aristotelian sense. And that's fine. Crichton adopts elements of tragedy and the concept of hubris, but he's not telling a tragic story. The readers won't come away with any sense of pity or catharsis from this. But maybe you will. I don't know. Which characters do you pity? I pity Ed Regis and Henry Wu more than I do John Arnold. Maybe even Dennis Nedry. All right, this has been a long one, guys. Thanks to my special guest, Robbie Dorman. Thank you so much for coming back and sharing more of your experiences with us. And I want to sign off to everybody who's listened to this as well. Thank you for joining me today. If you want to read along in the book and add some thoughts to what we've been discussing on the show, or be a guest on the show and chat with me about anything you like about Jurassic Park, you can do that by connecting with me. I'm at ryansrogers@gmail.com. If you'd like to be a guest, drop me a line and we can try and set something up. We can rehash, tear down, gush over, and chit-chat about any part of the book, or also not the book, all you'd like. Jurassic Park-Cast is part of the Spring Chicken's banner of amateur intellectual properties, including the Spring Chicken's Funny Pages, Tomb of the Undead graphic novel, the Second Lapse graphic novelettes, the Infantry, and the worst of them all, the King Street Capers. You can find links to all that baggage in the show notes or by visiting schickens.blogspot.com or finding us on Facebook at facebook.com/springchickencapers, or me, I'm on Twitter at RogersRyan22. Thank you dearly for tuning in to the Jurassic Park-Cast, the Jurassic Park podcast where we talk about the novel Jurassic Park, and also not that too. Until next time.